The motorway scene, the biggest new addition to between the mod and the commercial version. This didn't exist in the mod at all. It was a completely new thing.
Yeah, it's well, I wasn't sure where the idea spawned from to have this scene, whether I just sort of went off or we discussed it, or I can't remember. I can't
remember. Can you remember? It just kind of appeared, didn't it? And then
it was just this kind of. I think for me, actually, I remember being some technical difficulty between the drop and then coming out at the end part, but it was the same thing that we dealt with in the past of like, how do we not kill the player? From a technical standpoint, I think it might have been something to do that, but it was also, I can't remember where the whole thing came from.
I think it's my favourite point in the whole game, actually. I think it's just it's quite shocking, and it's so surreal, and it's so beautiful. And from an audio point of view, you have that baby's heartbeat bringing us back to the idea of the ultrasound. Was Esther pregnant? And it's one of those moments that I think everything just kind of collates together, and it's so unexpected.
Yeah, for me it's like a moment of realization.
Yes.
It's like it's coming to terms with something almost,
whether or not what actually is going on at the moment is real. This did happen. There's kind of an absolute. I remember playtesting it, and I didn't know that the car can get switched out with a hospital gurney, and I must have played it. I was like 3 or 4 times into playtesting it, and the first time it switched out and it was a gurney instead. I really remember kind of sitting there and going, "Oh God, that's just," and really being just stopped in my tracks by it. And it's one of those weird things you get when you're making a game that you'll never have those moments that a player does, where it all so well. It's really, really rare to be in a situation where you actually get a genuine, fresh player's eye view on what you're making.
Yeah, I was always a bit worried that it was maybe a bit too literal. Like we gone a bit too literal with that. But I think looking back at it now, there's still a lot of strangeness going on there. Obviously, the whole scene is unusual, but there's still these like very subtle details that are there that kind of still making you think, what does that mean? Like I think if you look closely, there's like coins scattered around and things like that. It's
And for me, it's, again, sorry to keep going on about it, but it's about layers of subconscious for me. That you start overground, you go into the caves, you go deeper, you're falling down, it's going down the rabbit hole effectively, and then you go to the deepest level, and that's actually the truth, that's the reality, that's what happened.
I love that it's actually underwater, which is weird. And again, this is what's giving me the Soma vibes. Can I even get out there? How do you want me to go around? The one audio log that I have to solve a puzzle for. What you got? What you got about this sign?
So the admission really is that I did play fast and loose with the geography of the M5. There isn't actually a welcome break services just outside the junction of Sanford, but we also know players. I mean, what a thing if you make something that's based vaguely on somewhere in real life. In terms of a compliment, when you're getting emails from players going, there isn't a welcome break there, and people really trying to work out where is this, and whole threads about where on the M5 it is. That's just the most amazing feeling. But I think what I really love what I think works really, really well in Esther, and again, it's something that I think is really carried forward to our other games, is that a lot of the time we're not dealing with kind of like big, glamorous, amazing, epic places. It's a sort of like a ratty little island in the Hebrides. It's someone who lived in Wolverhampton. It's just outside, a service station on a stretch of the M5. And I think that earths what's going on. Gives it a realness as well, particularly when you sort of put it against the surrealness of the caves. Actually, you're kind of going, this is really surreal and this is really, really dreamlike, but actually I'm talking about, a car accident just outside a little chef, and that playing off those two things against each other.
It's like making the ordinary extraordinary.
Absolutely, yeah.
Making the ordinary extraordinary. That could also be the tagline for walking simulators. Whoop. Now, I do think that is one of the more clunky parts of Dear Esther is the fact that you have the loading screen into the very literal, this was real and this is what happened. That's the end of the level. This should be the start of a new level. Unfortunately, we're going to phase out of the cave here. And again, this is what I'm talking about when I'm looking at an eye. Like, there's very clearly an eye there in the cave that we're walking out of.
This scene to me is like really, really iconic because it kind of brings this idea of the caves being an inward journey through the body together. It's really kind of like a symbol of rebirth, and it actually brings together a lot of the visual goals that I wanted to achieve with a lot of the symbolism in the game. Like, I've talked a little bit about how the environment was kind of designed to provoke emotions, and kind of the impressionistic style gives you just enough information to make you think of things and feel things. But this is probably like the antithesis of this, and the whole feeling of rebirth here is quite strong. I know Jess.
Yeah, the music's really supporting that.
Yeah,
because we've gone. She sings always, always throughout. You know, we've got always, always, and then she sings never, and a moment of absolute soaring. It's the climax of the music.
As you come out of the water and the music kind of swells, and you just kind of, it is like a moment of change has happened in some way, and
it's rebirth, isn't it? For me, it's his moment of clarity and acceptance and understanding of the reality of what's happened.
And you're literally moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel. You're actually doing that as you go through.
But the music, especially, I think before the music got layered in, that scene was nowhere near as kind of powerful for me. Like, that kind of just totally made it.
Okay, so I'm going to admit I don't listen to music for the lyrics. A lot of the time I listen to it for the actual music, so I didn't pick up that it was always, always, and never in the lyrics. Thank you for pointing that out. Dang, we are in Final Zone. We are in Final Zone. This zone is a little long, and I already see 1, 2, 3 audio cues. Let's get into it.
Dan and I had worked on lots of projects together, non-game projects, before we made Dear Esther. And I think the thing that links all of the projects that we've worked on together is that idea of hidden stories and layers of stories. And one of the things I wanted to do,
I knew it was Morse code,
was to embed hidden little hints and stories into it. So the music that you hear here has Morse code. And the Morse code is spelling out the word Esther.
I knew it.
And I really, really liked
because it wasn't SOS.
Of that some people would understand that it was Morse code and try and figure out what it was saying. It also provided a really interesting rhythmical dynamic. And yeah, it's just about these ideas of hidden stories and layers, but it also starts to emphasise the obsessional nature, I think, of the story in Dear Esther, and his agitation and actually slight panic. So you're getting this rhythm that just repeats and repeats and repeats obsessively. So I think even if you don't understand that it's saying Esther, and even if you don't understand that it's Morse code, you're still getting this feeling of this obsessional repetition and slight panic that he has. And again, it's kind of it's the new chapter, and it's spelling out that something has changed at this point.
All right, and Blueprints doesn't happen without this game. Does it never end?
It's probably the level which has changed most from the original mod, I think. It's much, much bigger than the final level in the mod. And one of the major changes in there is in the original mod, the whole side of the cliff face was covered in painting and writing, and a lot of that moved inside to that corridor in the caves where it's really obsessionally painted on. And it was really, we spent so long on that because we were trying to get it looking right, because it's one of those really interesting examples where I loved the image and the idea that you've got this guy painting the entire side of a mountain with words and symbols and things. But it was really interesting when it went into the rebuild, it just never worked. And I think it was because the environment was so crude in the mod that those symbols and that painting became the focus of the level. And it changed the feeling of the level completely when actually that just wasn't something we could realise in any way, that not even technically, but just didn't artistically look and feel right. And I think probably sort of retrospectively looking back on it, that's about the sort of the sophistication and the subtlety that then came into the art, rather than just being, this is literally just a canvas that we write words on, to actually the environment telling its own story without the story being literally painted on it.
Yeah, it was very difficult when we were experimenting with that to kind of like make it not completely unreal. Like, I think for me it was kind of, I wanted to kind of bring the player a little bit back into reality after the caves, and I think with having those symbols everywhere, it was kind of pushing them out a little bit. So I think what we came to, the kind of compromise we had, it was kind of a nice in between.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a compromise to me. It felt like, no, it felt like it didn't work, but it kind of, but those symbols were coded. Like there's the hill in the background when you're standing right at the end of the boat and you look back, and you suddenly realise that the shape of the mountain is the shape of a woman lying on a side asleep. And that, I remember seeing it the first time around and going, it's saying the same things, but it's saying it in a much, much, much subtler way than in the initial layer. But it was definitely challenging going back to how do you have a deep, complicated, subtle art style, but still manage to have something which is very sort of stark and symbolic laid over the top. It was much more challenging.
The shape of the island is a shape of a woman lying over on her side. Are you kidding me?
I think one of the most fascinating things for me about planning this director's commentary has been that in previous years, when all the three of us have talked about Dear Esther, we've talked about the interpretation of the player, but actually going through this together, post having made it, we're still surprising each other. Yeah, and I think that's really, really interesting for me, because it shows that we left interpretation for each other, and that we trusted each other actually just to get on with it. And because we each brought our own special and unique contribution to the game, we didn't have to, in a way, talk it to death or say, you have to justify every idea you have or talk it to death or explain it. That Rob's idea that the island is very tainted and corrupt, and my idea that Dan didn't know that the whole level of the caves is a birth metaphor. I think it's really amazing that we're still finding out things about the game that we didn't know.
I think it was nice when I came onto it, because Dan was basically like, he gave me a bunch of materials, but he left me to my own devices for a lot of it, and we kind of like, I'd finish the level and Dan would play it and give me some feedback, but he was very kind of like hands off at the beginning, which was really nice, kind of. So a lot of my interpretations just came through that downtime where I was just kind of like going off and doing my own thing. And so yeah, it's like interesting to hear Dan talk about it sometimes, because there's some backstory that I've never even considered before. And obviously hearing Jess talk about it as well is really interesting, especially when it comes to the soundtrack. It makes me look at things in a very different way. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I think for me, like making games is so inherently collaborative, and you have people coming together with different ideas and different takes on things. And in a way, the least interesting thing you can do with that is to structure it all so heavily that there's no space for each individual person to bring what they're thinking to it. And I think the best games, well, for me, my favourite games are ones where you can really feel the personal footprint of each individual developer and aspects of it, and it feels like it has been a genuinely collaborative exercise where everybody has thrown ideas into the mix and everybody is bringing something to the table rather than people are just following a kind of a really structured plan. So yeah, I think it probably is one of the reasons why Esther has had the sort of life it's had since release, is because there's 4 people if you include Nigel, all bringing very different things to it, and it gives it a huge amount of depth for something that's so simple on the surface.
I almost missed one. Wait, are you telling me art is collaborative? Shocker.
I'd been on holiday to Greece lots of times, and one of the things that I always really responded to emotionally was those shrines that you see on the road, and sometimes they're dedicated to saints, and sometimes they're to markate where an accident has taken place. So you'll get photos of the deceased person and flowers and candles, and they'd always really touched me. And so I said to Rob, I think it would be amazing to get these into the game somehow. And then Rob took that idea and ran with it. And I think they're so successful and they're so beautiful and they're really moving. And I think it's because you had this elemental scale. You have the island and it's huge and you have that scale. And all of a sudden you come around this corner and it's absolutely brought back to the human scale again and to that relationship of the individual. And I think the other thing that it does really successfully is it's a kind of magic realism, because there's no way that you could have all those amounts of candles lighting your way. Who's lit them? The island is empty. Who's put those shrines there? But I just think it's a really lovely bit of environmental storytelling, actually.
What Remains of Edith Finch does not happen without Dear Esther.
One of the really nice things about the move from mod to the commercial version is that we had a couple of years worth of the community talking about the game before we went back into it again. And one of the things that I read on a forum was that someone had constructed this amazing version of the story where they'd decided that the narrator was Paul. And I hadn't thought of that. It was never part of the original writing. And I thought, that's so amazing that as a writer, your audience can find something in what you're doing that you hadn't thought of. So it was really important when we went back in to record the additional set of voiceovers. I thought, I absolutely want to do this. I want to take this idea that's come out of the fans and to run with this and to add an entire new sort of stream of story in there. So we added in a couple of cues within the force level that intimated much more strongly that actually Paul wasn't this other character who caused the accident, but actually you were responsible for everything. But again, it was then trying to find that balance of not overcooking it, so you weren't led to that idea, but just if you happen to have the combination of just a couple of narrative units, then you would possibly come to that interpretation. But it was really amazing to be able to say, it felt like giving something back to the fans that had enabled us to make the remake in the first place. And it's always a lovely moment as a developer to be able to recognise your fan community and kind of say, thanks, this one's yours, this one's here for you.
I thought Paul was the walrus, not the narrator. But I guess that's what that one line that we got was, I promise I wasn't drunk.
What's fascinating to me, Dan, is that you're an atheist, but each of the 3 games that we've made are so strongly about religion, either the language or taking allegories and stories. Why are you so drawn to it?
I think I'm really interested in people and the stories that make up people. And I think there is like in the Bible, like most kind of religious texts, it's not about what it is, it's about what is behind what it is, and that's what you're really getting to, is the idea of the sort of the parable or the metaphor. And it really felt like, particularly with Paul on the road to Damascus, is a story that many people know and we can understand, and it's about redemption and consequence and guilt and transformation and who you really are and what that means. And it felt like just a really strong, powerful way of making it very accessible, the narrator's kind of inner turmoil, in a kind of a story that we know really well. And there's a universality to those kind of questions that, whether it's, Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's kind of Buddhism, that they're asking very broadly similar questions. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a good person? How should we behave to each other? How should we feel about the world we're in? And it's a really powerful way of speaking to a lot of people. And I think that's always been really important as well, is that it's about saying, no matter who you are or what your kind of like outlook on life is, whether that's faith-based or secular, that we are all effectively asking the same questions. And that's why I think all our games kind of tend to be around those questions.
Don't know if I agree with that one, but I don't know if there is a universal human experience. I think there are shades of human experiences that are shared between large majorities, but I don't know if you can argue that philosophically. or anthropologically.
Is Dear Esther a depressing game or a hopeful game?
For me, it's kind of like a mix of both, really. I think, like, my interpretation is kind of like, always feel like kind of depressed when I think about the kind of turmoil that this guy's been going through for God knows how long, and the kind of environment he's been in, and, you know, all these events surrounding his story. But for me, I always feel like a little bit hopeful at the end. You know, like the conclusion just feels like a relief, and like this is kind of all ended in some way. What do you think, Jess?
I think it's a game about acceptance, and I really like that. And I think it's telling that a lot of people with mental health issues have responded really positively to the game, and we get a lot of emails and letters from those people saying that it's helped them through a really difficult time. And for me, that's because it's about the struggle of being human, that it's hard and that we love and that we grieve and we lose, but we come through it. And those things are what makes us human, that it's transformative and that the pain is part of life. And that's a really beautiful message. And I think that's what you do so well, Dan. That's what you write about. You write about what it is to be human. So, Dan, you wrote it.
Without wanting to cop out, one of the things about writing it that I really wanted to do was to make something that people could take and could own, and it would be their take on it. And their interpretation of it mattered in a way that mine didn't. My job was to give them the architecture to interpret in their way. So
I think that is a cop-out. I do. I think as a writer you always have.
Yeah, I think it's redemptive. But I don't think the redemption is as cut and dried as it's all okay at the end. It's not okay at the end. But there is a release, there's an escape, that bad times will happen, but they will end. And they won't always end positively, but they will end. And that's I think, the redemption of it, of saying that
this
things are never
too shall
easy.
Pass.
This too shall pass.
Which my mum always says, you know, and I think that's probably the motto of the Chinese room, actually,
absolutely.
Isn't it?
Like, I don't think it's as kind of openly positive as, say, Rapture had a much more strongly positive end. I don't think Esther has. I think it's much greyer than that.
Everybody's gone to the Rapture.
Fundamentally, it's about coming to terms.
Everybody has gone to the Rapture. That's what they're referencing. I have not played Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Ooh, should that be on my to-do list? Maybe.